Perfect. All right, Miss Garvin specifically. I will start by stating my claim, and then it will go to Delia, and then to Matthew. My claim is that beehive fences are the most effective way to preserve biodiversity in Africa. My reasoning is that the big issue that surrounds preserving biodiversity is something that should be taken one issue at a time, and the effectiveness of beehive fences can be tested and put into place more quickly than it would take to get a bunch of national parks in place. Delia, your claim.
I believe the best solution is to create more bee fences around human civilizations in Africa while using corridors and more park reservations for elephants and to roam freely and elsewhere.
All right, perfect. So, shall we start debunking the claims? That's the correct word. Okay, first off, who would like to begin with taking on another person's claim? No, I guess I will go then. So, my only issue with, or I don't really have an issue with getting more land to make national parks and preserving wildlife in that manner. I just don't think that it should be something that is taken before other methods and other ways, such as the beehive fences, are put into place. Not only because we can't test how effective getting new national parks would be, though we know that it is much easier for people to, or for scientists to track them and to keep an eye on them to make sure that everything is going smoothly. But it is something that is going to likely take a lot longer than it would take to put in beehive fences, specifically for the elephants, which are a very important species in that area for that animals in that, oh, what's the word for like a specific area with certain animals in it?
Habitat?
Eco people in that ecosystem. I'm sorry, I couldn't think for a second. Yes, so that is my reasoning. Who would like to comment on that? Mm-hmm. Right. I definitely can see that point of view. I hadn't really thought about it in that manner. However, I don't think that it is as big of an issue as you're perceiving it to be, mostly because in the sources we have about the results of the beehive fences, since it has been tested and we have gotten results before. The farmers in question who have had beehive fences implemented into their farm have said that they were all happy with the way that it was going. If we did have more information about how putting in, or not putting in, but gathering all these bees into one place, really packing them on in that one specific area, how that affects the environment would be an interesting thing to know. However, we do not have that information as of right now. I do think, though, that doing this first would be a better alternative to just, saving up, I guess, to getting more land to save for the animals, because we don't know how long it will take. And even if we are making lots of progress, there's really no certainty that everything is under control until, a really good portion or all the land that scientists and professionals have, decided that should be reserved is reserved. What do you have to say about this, Matthew?
Well, with Delia's side, she is stating that using the bees it could be considered as invasive species, but could the elephants be considered as the invasive species? Because they are invading on the humans that are trying to live in Africa, and are destroying like their crops and their food and their materials for to properly live and thrive. So using the fences, it's definitely an effective way, and so is being able to track the elephants and using like wildlife corridors and such. So I mean, I think you both bring interesting views.
About the invasive elephants being considered an invasive species on that claim there, since they are already native to the specific of Africa that we're talking about right now, they're not necessarily considered that, especially because they already have such a big role in that ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that starting with one issue and then proceeding to take on the rest is a much better alternative to trying to take on the whole thing at once, because then with getting all this land, there, I'm sure, are going to be other issues as well, whether it be social, whether it be environmental, anything like that. However, I do think that long term, it is going to be a good idea to, get more land for wildlife corridors. It's just, I don't think it should be the priority. I think the priority should be helping out not only the humans and keeping that relationship good, it's making sure that a keystone species is as safe as possible. And with the addition of the bees there, despite not knowing what effects they have on the environment it's also really comforting, I suppose is the word, to know that they're not only helping the elephants, they're also helping the farmers. And just even though they might, go after the elephants, sting them, whatever, it's not going to have a big effect on them long term. And it helps the farmers make money, which I think is also very important, is making sure that they're well off too. Anything to add, Delia? Mm-hmm. I don't think that or wait, I'm sorry. I do have a comment on that. I do think that it is like a little worrisome that I'm me personally, I'm more worried about the bees having died after stinging. You know, once they sting, they die. However, stinging an elephant is really not going to do much. We already know that they're scared, so regardless if the elephants run into the fence or not, it's already going to kind of scare them away. As we saw in the video, they ran away just from the noise of bees, not from actually seeing them. So with so many beehives around the same place, the sound will definitely be a lot louder, which keeps most or more elephants away than it would with just like a regular fence. Or just a fence with, you know, just like one beehive that happened to be there. The bee situation, though, with them stinging the elephant and then dying afterwards, I'm not sure what the statistics are on average, because, you know, when you just see if a bee just by itself gets bothered, obviously only that bee will sacrifice itself. But bees are pretty intelligent species that have a really good way of communicating. So I'm not sure exactly how that would work out if, multiple beehives got out, how many of the bees would go out to sting the elephant, or how quickly the elephant would run away to see how the bees, like to see if they could escape the bees. I think it would be interesting to find out how that would take place, and I also think it depends on each and every situation, depending on like the group of elephants that's trying to get into the farm. All in all, though, I don't think that in the case that an elephant does come to the fence, I don't think that it will be a big issue on either thing, because most people have been stung by bees before, and we're a much weaker, smaller species. And when we get stung by bees, most of the time we're just fine. So yeah, that's my comment on that. What do you think, Matthew?
That's an interesting point. For the bees, their own well-being, I believe that to see such a big threat as this big giant elephant trying to invade on your hive, like as a bee, I would.
As a bee,
yeah. I mean, my thought is that many bees would try to attack it and get rid of the threat.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you said, one single bee might not be effective, but if several bees go at the elephant at once, it could be effective. And with all those bees dying out at once, you're
Mm-hmm.
just killing all these bees, and that doesn't equal a dead elephant every time. And I mean, we're not trying to kill the elephants, we're trying to repel them. But I see the point.
Yeah, on that, I can see that, when there is a big threat, such as an elephant coming towards the bee's hive, I really don't know what it is like that, because obviously there are so many beekeepers. If you're a beekeeper, I feel like there's probably not a single beekeeper that hasn't been stung at least once. And when you're going straight for the hive, when you're going straight for the homeland, the motherland, whatever you want to call it, there's no way that the entire hive is dumb enough to all go out and sacrifice themselves all at the same time, you know? Even so, I feel like we would hear about it, because there are lots of really huge bee farms and huge beehives. And in the case that something were to invade it and all the bees were to go out, I feel like it would be much more common knowledge, because bees are very common, and on the fact that we don't necessarily know, like us specifically, don't necessarily know what effects that would do to an animal or a person, going near the bees. If you got stung by every bee in a hive, I'm sure that would have some longer term effects than just, a few bee stings. So while I do think that it's something to consider, it's also like and another thing, we don't even know what kind of bees they're using. Like, could be honeybees, but it could be wasps as well, which don't die when they sting, I don't think, right? Isn't it just honeybees? Mhm. 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 Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all of those things are important to consider. However, it is also going to depend on each farmer, like specifically depending on what kind of style they have already, just based on their personal moral compass or whatever, and just how they gravitate to taking care of the bees. I do think, though, that the people who are in charge of it are professionals, and therefore um, like their take on how it should be done is pretty valid. And though there are multiple ways to do it, since it's on such a large scale, like there are so many beehives going to be implemented to surround the whole farm, which often takes up a lot of space. um like losing a few like bees, like I don't know, set I don't know the average number of bees per hive, but say like 5 to 7 bees go out to attack the elephant, and there's 2 hives on each like rope in which it goes through and it shakes the hives. Say that 14 bees go to attack the elephant. The elephant is huge, and there's still like 20, 30 bees. I don't know if this is accurate at all, but there's still a lot of bees in the hive. And also, bees are created very quickly. As in, like the queen, when she lays eggs, there's a lot of them. So, especially with elephants, like a bee sting won't kill them. A few bee stings will not kill them, especially if there's a pack of them. If each like different elephants are getting targeted by different bees, that means that all of them as a whole will receive less stings. Um, all in all, though, I don't think that you know, it's nothing that's going to hurt the animal long term. So I don't think that it's something that is worth, a good amount of worrying. And I do have to go plug my phone in, so I will get the locations. I think the most important part to consider about that statistic is that the farmers said that they were pleased with that. See, because that statistic specifically is worrying about the well being of the farm and the farmers, in which they stated that when an elephant, in the case that an elephant did get in, it was usually a smaller amount of elephants, and it was much easier for the farmer to chase them off the ground, and they did much less damage. I think the most important part to consider when you're looking at the welfare of the farmers is to notice how pleased they are. And if they are pleased, then I think that that's enough to state that this is a good idea and that it should be implemented more frequently. Just until the funds and the time has gone up enough to focus on the biodiversity as a whole rather than just one species, or I guess 3 species if you consider humans and bees as well. What would you like to add, or if you would like to add anything, Matthew?
Um, Back to the statistic that Delia presented was that 80% out of 100% of elephants are repelled from the farms using the beehive fences. And it may not look a lot to you, Delia, but that's basically 8 out of 10 times they stopped an elephant. So they stopped 8 elephants out of 10. I want you to imagine that. Okay, yes, that's true. Um, Yeah, so we
Well,
have to.
no, the farmers did say that get one small, or not small elephant, but like a small pack of elephants getting into the farm did not do nearly as much damage and still kept, like, they were easy to shoo off, you know? The things were much easier for the farmers to deal with. And I think if the farmers are okay with dealing with them and it's not been a problem for them, there's been no struggle, there's no complaints. I think that that is a good good alternative to not doing anything, first of all, and just to preserving biodiversity as a whole. Because though this only focuses on a few species, it's, you know, in the grand scheme of things, much more effective than trying to get all of this land that is going to take a very long time to completely get. And in that time, you'll see that nothing is going to, you know, nothing's going to change, right? If the effects aren't taken immediately, it's going to take a very long time to change. If we don't know what will happen in those times, in the time between now and when all the land that is needed is acquired. Yes, exactly. That was my point exactly on why I thought it was more reliable to start off with the beehive fences and look into getting wildlife corridors as a more long-term thing, and something that is going to take much longer than it is to just implement some fences in farmers all around the area, especially because even now, this has been a struggle for a while. So, and if we still don't have all the land now, it's going to take much longer. And I just think it's like, it's a good idea, and it's, in a few, not a few, but in a while, it's definitely something that can be accomplished. I think it's important to focus on what happens still inside those wildlife corridors, because even though everything in them is going to be protected, um, there, nothing says anything about the farmers. So regardless if or if not, or like if we get or if they get more land to get wildlife corridors, the farmers will still be at a loss there, because that doesn't say anything about the people. So it's just a good idea to do, just while we're waiting. And I think in like long term, it should be looked into to do both. Is my take. Right. And I do think that is a good idea long term. But again, since we can't promise the land, if we don't do anything about the farmers now, they could potentially have to wait like 5-10 years before they are getting that kind of additional help for them and their families. Is there anything you'd like to add to what Delia or I said, Matt?
I mean, not much. It's just that, how I'm viewing this is that the long-term solution to this, and the one that I think will be the most effective, but will take the longest, is to have the wildlife corridors up and active and in use. While the fences are short and pretty much easy, and pretty efficient way to, do this kind of the same thing. That's how I view it.
Just with like less species, like as a direct focus, because every individual animal there is important, because
Yes.
the example that they used in one of the videos that they watched, how the keystone species one, how the keystone, if you take it, the whole thing could fall. But I think it's also true with if you remove any other stone, if you remove any other stone from the thing, it could fall. So that's why it is important to focus on every species. However, it's just so really it's ludicrous to attempt to take it all on at once, especially with the knowledge that it's going to take much longer. It's definitely something that in a few years should be like a permanent thing for that area, so that they can really keep an eye on animals that may be going that are in danger. But until then, we need to focus on something more universal to each species until we can really reach every single one of them individually. Right. Yes. And again, that's why discussing this issue is so important, because it's really, you can't make a decision like this without a lot of people aware and on board as well. So, just going off of a few people's opinions is probably not the best idea. It should be, or issues with the environment just on the world as a whole is a really important thing that really should be more of a concern for people who are educated on things like this. So because of this, I think it would be easier to, it would be like, we are going to continue to, or like the statement I guess they would make would be, we are going to continue to, seek out more land to reserve for wildlife corridors, and just keeping track of the animals and making sure that we can keep them safe, but still making efforts to do things like now, because you say that you'll do this and then it takes longer than you expected, and then people are starting to get angry. So continuing to do these efforts is important. To socially it's important, and it's also important just to keep making these efforts, keep trying to it's like a control thing, just keeping control of things as of right now, because just the whole situation is something that's not very controllable. So yeah.
So, Aislinn, so your solution is to use the beehive fences, and how do you think that's like exactly how is that going to maintain like the biodiversity of the elephants?
I think what's most important is to consider what will happen if we don't implement this feature. Because if we don't do this, then not only are we going to, there's two options. Either we're going to drive the farmers away from that land, or they're going to, stand up for themselves, and they're going to stay there, and they're going to have to take care of the elephants one way or another before they destroy their entire income system, in which they're probably going to have to kill the elephants. And if this becomes a big issue for the farmers, where they're always trying to get into the farms, then we're going to be losing more elephants than we are gaining elephants. And if we see that decrease in the population, then we're going to see a decrease in many other populations, and then perhaps an increase in certain populations that are going to change just everything, so starting small like this is not actually as small as it may sound, because if we do implement it, then none of those things are at risk. You know, despite elephants still getting into the farm sometimes, it's less likely to drive farmers to the brink of moving their location than it is if we don't do anything. And not only that, it shows that, you know, they're trying to help out the farmers and the elephants. And with trying to keep the elephants alive, um, that's a big concern as well, because if not, then you know that's really what's going to happen, because we don't lose the farmers either. The farmers are equally as important, or not, maybe not equally, but they're also very important.
So Delia, I have the pretty much the same question for you. Like, how do you think your the wildlife corridors are gonna maintain it better than the fences? Yes.
Right. Um, yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's a good thing to look into again long term. My only issue with this is that it's a very big
Big project, yes.
yeah, it's a big project, so it's much better for both parties to start off small, because if we just, you know, say that that's our solution, right? You're like, all right, this is the solution that we're going for, and then we don't provide any additional um like help for the farmers or the elephants, then we're going to see a decrease before they can get their hands on the situation and kind of get control of it, which is in itself a pretty big issue. But then there's also the issue of like, you know, just the sorry, trying to find my words. um yeah, there's the issue of trying to keep everything maintained after that, you know, because even when they do get their control of the situation, there's no other alternative being provided to keeping elephants away from the farmers' properties. And so I think that even if it was something that was implemented after the claiming of all the land that they need to get control of, there's still nothing preventing that. It's just more watched now, you know? What do you have to add about that specific statement, Delia? Right, or some kind of solution, or anything like that. And I think that's a good point, but again, back to the time issue, and then there's, along with that, the money issue, the all of that. But still, all in all, that is going, like, really, that is a good plan. That is a good idea. But it's just so, as of right now, it's unmanageable, right? You can't control how fast the land is acquired, and really, because depending on who, as of right now, owns the land, already the video that we watched, they mentioned that the animals there don't even spend a lot of their time in the national parks that are already established. So oh. Oh, okay. That's at least like my whole sleep. Okay, well, at least it wasn't 5 minutes. Oh, that's a long time. You said 5 seconds. Okay, Matthew, I do have a question for you. So, me and Delia both have our specific ideas of what to do next, right? Do you have any specific claims on what should be done first, or what should be done before the other, or what should be done just what do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with the corridors being long term, and the again, the fences being the short and pretty quick thing. But I think maybe the corridors can be, it definitely should be something we're working on. But in the meantime, I think the most the effective thing to do would be to use the fences while we are developing the corridors.
Right, I agree.
So, I mean, keeping corridors as an option will probably provide some more living spaces and such for the elephants. And
yes,
using the fences will repel the elephants from the humans society as well.
Right, yes. And one thing about that, asking, as to why we could be a little hold on, I can't think of the word again. I don't know. It's why we might be a little bit suspicious, I guess. What's the word for it? I don't know. That's the best word I can think of for right now. Why we might be a little, apprehensive. Me and Matthew have been over why we might be a little bit apprehensive to dive straight into developing wildlife corridors. What, besides the statistic of elephants getting into the farm and the welfare of the bees, are there any other reasons why you might be apprehensive to implementing bee fences? Yeah, and despite all those being very valid concerns, I think that, though not being the main concern of the public eye, has all been individually looked over, because this has been something that was implemented and tested. Since the wildlife corridors is such a big project, it's something that cannot be tested. Especially because, again, there is no information on the specific areas in which there are no claims to. Since we already have the information that goes with the beehive fences, I think it's just a much safer and a much more efficient alternative to taking on a big project such as this and not getting any changes for another 5-10 years, you know. Yes, and I definitely agree with that as well.
I think, well, let's say that the government was more attentive to building
Looked
the
over and looked over.
the
What, Matthew?
corridors.
What? Matthew, what you said? Wait, can you
What's
not
wrong?
hear me? Wait, hold on. Or I suppose, Matthew, what were you going to say? I didn't hear it. I don't know if Delia did.
Yeah, you guys can hear me now, right? Okay. Let's say that the government was more attentive and put more attention and work into the corridors. Delia, what do you think the result would be from that?
I can see that, but also I think this goes a little bit further than just getting the land needed. It's also about getting staff. It's also about training staff, and also about figuring out what exactly they need for each one, because each piece of land, each park is going to be different than the ones that are already established now. Especially considering the fact that if the government is not on board, or even if it is, the minimum amount of time could take longer because of their search for staff. And since there is time already going into it, there's already no chance that people who are already experts or who have worked in this field for a while are going to immediately be able to work there because of obviously their location compared to where these parks are being established. Because if there are people, you know, in that field of study as of right now, and the parks don't get implemented for another year or two, those jobs, they have probably already found them. And you know, regardless of that, there's always going to be some getting used to and just really breaking in the parks, which can take, you know, quite a while, because if it took, I think one statistic that I have in my mind here is looking at the population of adult lions. It only went up by like, I don't remember exactly, around like 30, and that was over the course of like 14 years. if it takes that long for something to change, it's going to take that long to find out if anything is changing. So if they find out after a while that nothing too heavy is going, like if they're not heavily providing for that ecosystem, then changes are going to have to be made, especially if there's a decrease or decrease in quality of life for every party involved. Does anyone have anything to add to that? I think so. I think we've covered everything. Oh wait, should we give some kind of
Closing statements. Yeah.
So it looks like most of us can agree on some terms that beehive fences are a good short-term alternative, and that regardless of how short-term it is, getting a bunch of wildlife corridors is going to be a much bigger project. And until then, it's definitely going to be up to people with more knowledge than us. We did struggle in a few areas on having the statistics we needed. However, I think that the opinion still stands. Anything to add? Anyway. Right. Yeah, I can see that too. I think, well, of course, nothing really, no solution is going to be perfect, but I think both of these are very good options. And all of the opinions I think that I have been stated already. So I am all set. Anything? Anybody add in?
I'll just say that I think the government should be paying the equal amount of attention to the fences and the corridors, because they both are going to be effective. And I do believe that the corridors would be more effective, but there's no way of knowing that yet. Depends on the space and how big it is and such. And that, I mean, in the meantime, all we can do is, as a short-term solution again, is to keep the fences up and to properly maintain them while we develop the corridors.
Right. I think those all are very good points. I think those all are very good views, and I think that really we've covered everything, and this was a very enlightening debate.
Yep. Agreed.